Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into the life of one of modern history's most, well, talked about and impactful figures, Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill. You've sent us a fantastic stack of sources, including some really insightful bits from Winston Churchill, architect of the 20th century. Looks like we're set for a rich, multi-layered look at him.
Absolutely. Churchill's story is just immense, isn't it?
It really is. When you think about it, it's not just politics. His life was this tapestry woven with military experience, deep intellectual work, strategic genius, and remarkably, a serious career in literature, too.
Yeah, truly multifaceted.
So our mission today really is to pull out the key insights from these sources to give you a really solid understanding of his huge influence on the 20th century.
Exactly. And looking at Churchill, it isn't just about the man himself. It's pretty essential for understanding the whole sweep of the 20th century, the politics, the society, the culture. We'll be trying to connect the dots, between his personal journey and these massive global events he helped shape. It's fascinating how his individual choices, his character, intersected with these huge historical shifts.
So by the end of this, you should have a clearer picture, not just of who Churchill was, but maybe why he still sparks so much debate and remains such a pivotal figure. Okay, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Right, let's start at the beginning. Our sources show Winston Churchill was born November 30th, 1874, in Oxfordshire. Born right into the heart of the British aristocracy.
Blenheim Palace, no less.
Exactly. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, a big name in conservative politics. His mother, Jenny Jerome, a very dynamic American socialite. And the sources really highlight this blend of British and American cultures as like foundational to his character.
Yeah, that transatlantic mix is presented as really significant. It's not just a quirky biographical detail.
So we gave him a dual perspective, maybe? Old world, new world kind of thing?
Sort of. I mean, his father's career obviously plunged him into politics from day one. He was watching, listening. That sparked the interest early on.
Right.
And his mother's American side, the sources emphasize this wasn't just incidental. It's seen as a root of his international outlook, that understanding of the Anglo-American connection he championed later.
Ah, okay, so that early environment was key.
It seems so. The sources suggest that this kind of exposure, contrasting worldviews early on, might cultivate a certain diplomatic agility, useful later.
Makes sense. So his education
Mm-hmm.
followed that classic aristocratic path, Harrow School, then the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst.
The expected route.
And this military training, what did it give him? Sources say it was key for discipline, leadership skills. But more than just that, right?
Oh, definitely. Sandhurst instilled that rigorous training, hierarchy, strategy, command. It's laying groundwork. After graduating in '95, he's an officer in the British Army.
And seeing action pretty quickly.
Yeah, real action. India, Sudan, South Africa.
Yeah.
These weren't quiet postings. He was experiencing imperial warfare firsthand.
So not just theory.
Not at all. He was in the thick of it. Think about the Malakand field force in India, tribal uprisings, or the cavalry charge at Omdurman in Sudan. The sources talk about his courage, his adventurous spirit.
And wasn't he also writing during this time?
Exactly. That's what's fascinating. He's working as a war correspondent simultaneously.
Wow.
So he's fighting, observing, analyzing, and writing about it. It's honing his writing talent, his analytical skills. This duality, the action guy and the words guy, emerges super early.
So that perspective, fighting and writing, that must have been unique.
Hugely. It shaped how he saw things, how he communicated, a powerful combination that would define his career, really.
Okay, let's move on. 1900, he steps into politics, elected as a conservative MP initially.
Following in his father's footsteps initially.
But then, the sources point this out quickly, there's a twist. He switches to the Liberal Party, embraces a reformist agenda. That wasn't just a minor shift, was it? Especially for someone from his background.
No, not at all. A very significant move. This period, roughly 1900 to 1914, really shows his political flexibility and an early progressive streak that sometimes gets forgotten.
Why the switch, though? What drove it?
The sources suggest he was really unhappy with the conservative stance on tariff reform. He saw it as bad for free trade, bad for the working class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So policy disagreements.
Big ones. He felt the liberals were more in tune with the social challenges Britain faced then. So he dives into issues like worker rights, social welfare, education reform.
And the Navy.
And crucially, modernizing the Royal Navy. His commitment to social improvement was quite striking for an aristocrat of that era. He seemed genuinely focused on things like old age pensions, national
And
insurance,
in 1908, he gets a big job, First
rent,
Lord of the Admiralty.
huge role. And he really throws himself into restructuring the Navy.
The sources stress his push here. Strengthening the Navy directly helped Britain's resilience decades later in World War II. That's incredible foresight.
It really is. Think about the specific things he championed, pushing for the fleet to switch from coal to oil. That was radical then.
Coal to oil. Why was that such a big deal?
Speed, range, efficiency for the warships. It was a massive technological and logistical shift, but he saw it was necessary for future naval power. And investing in naval aviation, too, very early days for that.
So he saw naval power as absolutely critical.
For an island nation, absolutely. And connecting this back, his earlier time as Home Secretary, 1910, 1911, saw him implementing social policies, labor reforms, trying to improve prison conditions, for example.
So quite progressive for the time.
Generally, yes. Though he also faced criticism, like his handling of the Tony Pandy riots, using troops during labor disputes. It showed his commitment to order, but also complicated his relationships.
So he wasn't afraid to cross party lines or ruffle feathers.
Not at all. Showed a fierce independence. He'd follow his convictions, even if it wasn't the easy political path. It raises that question, right? How much was conviction versus just, political calculation?
A bit of both, maybe.
The sources lean towards real conviction on reform, but he was definitely a pragmatist too. He understood the game.
Okay, let's move into a really defining and difficult chapter. World War I kicks off in 1914.
A massive turning point for him, politically and personally.
As First Lord of the Admiralty, he's right at the center of naval strategy in those crucial early years, where the Western Front is grinding down into trench warfare.
Right. And Churchill had this strong conviction, the sources really emphasize this, that the war couldn't just be won on the Western Front. He was looking for another way.
Which leads us to
Gallipoli.
Gallipoli,
Yeah.
his most debated decision, certainly from this period. Planned in 1915, the goal was incredibly ambitious, almost audacious.
Oh, it was the core idea. Seize the Dardanelles straight from the Ottoman Empire. Open an Eastern Front, get supplies to Russia, maybe knock Turkey out of the war entirely, break the stalemate.
A strategic gamble, though.
A huge one. He believed passionately this soft underbelly approach could shorten the war dramatically. The sources paint him as almost obsessed with the potential.
But the reality?
Devastating.
Utterly devastating. The sources detail the planning errors, the lack of proper preparation, underestimating the Ottoman defense.
Which was unexpectedly strong.
Fierce and well-organized. The result was just catastrophic failure. Around 250,000 Allied casualties killed, wounded, captured, died of disease. A terrible toll.
And for Churchill personally?
A massive political wound. He was blamed, forced to resign from the Admiralty by late 1915, widespread condemnation. His career looked, well, shattered.
How do you even come back from something like that? Such a public high-stakes failure.
It's remarkable. It would have finished most politicians.
Yeah.
But Churchill, he didn't just disappear. The sources highlight his resilience. He actually went to the Western Front.
Took command of a battalion, lieutenant colonel in the Royal Scots Fusiliers. Put himself right there in the trenches.
Wow. That's unexpected.
It wasn't just symbolic. He was facing the reality of the war he'd helped shape, the war that had cost him so much politically. It shows his commitment, maybe his need to understand it from the ground up, and his ability to analyze even his own failures.
So he learned from it, even though it was painful.
Profoundly. That experience in the trenches, it informed his understanding of warfare deeply. He carried those lessons into World War II. He didn't shy away. He confronted it.
Okay, so the war ends.
Wow.
What happens next for Churchill? The sources call the interwar years a time of ups and downs.
That seems fair. He gets back into government, briefly as Secretary of State for War in 1917, involved in the war's end and demobilization. But the 1920s were tough for Britain.
Economic problems, social unrest.
Exactly. Economic crises, big labor movements, general instability. It needed careful handling.
And he becomes Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yes. From 1924 to 1929, a different challenge entirely, focused on public finance, economic stability, trying to guide Britain through very choppy waters.
And made some controversial decisions there too, right? Like the gold standard.
Yes, the return to the gold standard in 1925, intended to bring back pre-war stability, but many sources argue it actually deepened the economic problems, deflation, unemployment, especially hitting industries like coal mining.
So, a tough gig.
Mm.
Shows his versatility, though. Military, social policy, economics.
Definitely versatile. Always trying to strengthen the nation, even if the policies were debated.
But then the 1930s arrive. And this brings us to one of his most, well, famous and prescient periods, even though he was out of favor.
His warnings about Nazism.
Yeah. The sources highlight him as one of the very few prominent voices raising the alarm early on about Hitler, about German rearmament, the aggression.
He was almost alone among major figures.
Especially with the policy of appeasement being so dominant. Most leaders were hoping for peace, negotiation.
Understandably so, after the trauma of World War I, people desperately wanted to avoid another conflict, but Churchill saw something different. He saw the danger clearly.
And he wasn't quiet about it.
Not at all. He spoke out relentlessly, criticized the government's defense policies as inadequate, urged a much stronger stance against Hitler's expansionism,
And the reaction.
political isolation. The sources really emphasize this. He was sidelined, marginalized within his own party even, labeled a warmonger, considered out of touch, alarmist.
Those must have been incredibly frustrating years for him. His wilderness years, they're often called.
Exactly. Imagine being convinced disaster is coming, but nobody in power is listening. It highlights the cost of being ahead of the curve, especially when the message is unpopular.
And tragically, he was proven right.
Utterly right. Which brings us to 1940.
May 1940, France is collapsing. Britain faces invasion, and Churchill becomes prime minister.
Right at the moment of maximum peril, the darkest days, as the sources put it, Britain standing alone against the Nazi war machine.
And he becomes this incredible symbol of resistance, doesn't he?
Absolutely. His leadership in that period, it's hard to overstate its importance for morale. Decisive, charismatic. It was vital.
His speeches.
Iconic. Those radio broadcasts, the speeches in Parliament, they were masterpieces of rhetoric. They didn't just report, they inspired. They unified a nation under siege.
He didn't shy away from the danger, did he?
No, he acknowledged it head-on. Blood, toil, tears, and sweat. But then he infused it with this incredible spirit of defiance. We shall never surrender.
That phrase became legendary. A rallying cry.
It really did. It captured the mood, the determination, and he wasn't just giving speeches. Think about Dunkirk. He was involved in rallying support, organizing that evacuation, the little ships. It showcased that national spirit he tapped into.
So beyond motivating Britain, what about his wider impact? The alliances.
Crucial. He was a tireless diplomat, building that grand alliance with Roosevelt in the U.S. and, crucially, Stalin in the Soviet Union.
That must have been incredibly complex, such different leaders, different systems.
Hugely complex. Managing those relationships, especially with Stalin, required immense skill and pragmatism. His personal relationship with Roosevelt was key, leading to things like Lend-Lease, vital aid for Britain.
So it was military leadership and diplomatic juggling.
Constantly. The Atlantic Charter in '41, signed with Roosevelt, outlining post-war aims for freedom and democracy. He was always working on holding the coalition together, traveling to conferences, Tehran, Yalta, Potsdam, shaping the post-war world even as the war raged.
Which brings us to the end of the war. Victory. And then
Then a surprise. The 1945 general election, Churchill and the Conservatives lose. Heavily.
just weeks after VE Day. It seems incredible given his wartime status.
It shocked many at the time. But the sources explain the public mood had shifted. People wanted change, social reform, security after years of war. The Labour Party under Attlee offered that vision of a welfare state.
So wartime leadership didn't automatically translate to peacetime mandate.
Apparently not. But his influence didn't just vanish. He remained a major figure on the world stage. His views on Reconstruction, on the emerging Cold War, were still highly significant.
And he makes a comeback.
He does. Re-elected prime minister in 1951, serves until 1955, almost 6 years after that shock defeat.
And what were his priorities in that second term?
The sources highlight his focus on the big Cold War issues, strengthening the Western Alliance, NATO, nuclear deterrence, Britain developing its own bomb, thinking about European integration, Britain's place in this new bipolar world.
Trying to secure Britain's position.
Exactly. But this period also sees the start of serious decolonization, and this is where his legacy gets more complex, according to the sources.
How so?
Well, while he championed freedom against totalitarianism, his views on the British Empire were, let's say, more traditional. He seemed resistant to its rapid dissolution.
So clashes over independence movements.
Yes. The sources mention controversial decisions and policies regarding places like India, though independence happened before his second term, but also Egypt, Kenya during his premiership. His administration faced criticism for how it handled some of these transitions.
So a leader adapting, or perhaps struggling to adapt, to a fundamentally changing world.
That seems to be the tension highlighted. His vision, forged in an earlier era, bumping up against these powerful post-war shifts towards independence. It adds definite layers of complexity to his legacy.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit, because it's easy to just focus on the politician, the war leader. But the sources emphasize another huge part of his life, Churchill, the writer.
Yes, it's an incredible aspect. Over 40 books published, history, biography, even a novel early on.
It wasn't just a hobby, was it? This was a serious literary career running alongside everything else.
Absolutely not a hobby. The sources stress he was a genuinely accomplished author. Writing was how he supported himself financially for periods, especially during those wilderness years.
And his most famous work is probably his history of World War II.
The 6th volume, The Second World War, yes,
Yeah.
It's monumental. Detailed accounts of everything, military, political, human dimensions. Based on his own experiences, his unique position, they're considered vital historical sources.
An insider's account, basically.
Exactly. Combining historical detail with his very distinct literary style, his personal perspective, it powerfully shaped how the war was understood for decades.
And he wrote other major histories, too.
A History of the English-Speaking Peoples, another massive 4-volume work covering centuries of history, culture, shows his deep engagement with history and his heritage, a grand narrative style.
And the ultimate recognition for all this writing.
The Nobel Prize in Literature, awarded in 1953.
Wow. For literature, not peace.
Correct. Specifically for literature, recognizing, as the citation said, his mastery of historical and biographical description, as well as for brilliant oratory in defending exalted human values.
So it wasn't just honorary. It was for the quality of the work.
Unquestionably. It cemented his status. His writings are still studied, important sources. They blend history, strategy, personal insight. It really highlights the power of narrative from someone who lived the history they're writing about.
Yeah, that participant perspective is powerful.
Even if you always have to read it critically, knowing the author's viewpoint, but it shaped public memory profoundly.
So let's try and pull this all together. His legacy. What's the overall picture from the sources?
Well, the sources emphasize his huge, multifaceted impact. His leadership in World War II, defending democracy against totalitarianism, that's central. It cemented him as an icon.
A symbol of defiance and freedom.
Absolutely. His courage, his determination, seen as vital not just for Britain's survival, but for the global defense of those values. And his vision went beyond the war itself.
Into the Cold War.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Influencing the foundations of the Western Alliance. Coining the phrase Iron Curtain in his Fulton speech in '46, warning about the Soviet threat early on, shaping post-war Europe, transatlantic relations.
But, as we touched on, it's not presented as a simple heroic story. There are complexities.
Yes, the sources are clear on that. His legacy isn't without controversy. His colonial policies, certain military actions, his views on empire, they draw criticism. Their long-term effects are still debated.
So it's important to acknowledge those nuances.
Crucial for a full understanding, it raises that big question. How do you reconcile the inspiring leadership, the foresight, with the decisions or views that seem problematic now?
A challenge with many historical figures, but maybe especially with Churchill, because his impact was so enormous.
Precisely. Ultimately, he remains this unique figure for studying leadership, strategy, intellect, political vision. You really can't understand the 20th century without understanding Churchill.
His works, his speeches, they still resonate.
They do. They inspire. They provoke. His life story, as the sources conclude, feels like proof that determination, courage, intellect can make a profound difference, even in the darkest times. But it leaves a legacy that's still actively discussed, debated, analyzed.
What an incredible journey through his life. From those aristocratic roots, the early adventures, the political shifts, the 2 world wars, that surprising literary career.
Yeah.
Quite a story.
Truly unique. His impact just stretches across so much of the 20th century.
And his life really shows that complex interplay, doesn't it? Between one individual's character, their choices, and these huge historical forces.
Definitely. A man of deep contradictions, incredible resilience, and actions that still spark debate today. That shows you the weight of his influence.
So, as you listening reflect on all this, here's maybe a final thought to chew on. In our own complex times with information coming at us constantly, what can we maybe learn from Churchill's willingness, back in the 30s, to stand alone, to be unpopular, even ostracized, for a truth he saw when others didn't? How might that blend He had political skill, military understanding, intellectual depth, offer us any perspective on leadership today, especially when maybe the easy path or the popular view isn't the right one. Something to think about.
A very relevant question.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary, complex life of Winston Churchill. We hope you feel a bit more informed and maybe a lot more curious.
So.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive, tailor-made just for you.